Deep within the highland jungles of Guatemala, the canopy swallows sound and light, leaving only the hum of insects and the weight of centuries. It is here, among the tangled roots and the mist, that colossal stone faces once stared silently toward the stars. They were monuments to an age we barely understand, carved with a precision that challenged the tools we assumed the ancients possessed. And then, in a violent spasm of human indifference, they were reduced to rubble and dust. What you are about to hear is not a ghost story, but something far more chilling, the chronicle of physical evidence that was deliberately erased. The disappearance of the stone heads of Guatemala leaves us staring at a blank space in history where a profound truth might once have stood. We tell ourselves that stone is eternal, that the past is anchored in granite, but the jungle tells a different story. These massive sculptures, some weighing many tons, were first documented by modern explorers in the mid-20th century. They emerged from the earth like forgotten gods, their features broad and severe, their lips thick, their eyes turned inward as if guarding a deep unrest. Photographs from that era capture the uneasy encounter between a modern camera lens and a relic that refused to be categorized. In those grainy black and white images, the heads sit cradled by strangler figs, their scale made terrifyingly clear by the men standing dwarfed beneath them. The stone faces did not match the visages of the Maya who later inhabited the region, nor did they resemble the known Olmec carvings found elsewhere. They were anomalies, inexplicable fragments of a distinct sculptural tradition that seemed to belong to a race of giants. Local villagers who had known of the heads for generations whispered that they were the portraits of ancient rulers, men who stood twice the height of a normal person. These were not idle fairy tales. They were the living memory of a landscape that had nurtured monsters in stone and, perhaps, in flesh. To understand the magnitude of the loss, you must first walk the damp trails where the heads were discovered on a sprawling ranch near the Pacific slope. The jungle there is a devouring presence, a green oblivion that reclaims temples and highways with equal dispassion. Dr. Oscar Padilla Lara, a Guatemalan archaeologist, became one of the primary witnesses to the heads before their destruction, and his accounts brim with a sense of helpless urgency. He described how the sculptures lay scattered across the terrain, some completely exposed, others half buried like drowning swimmers frozen in basalt. One head, partially documented, bore an elaborate helmet or headdress carved deeply into the stone, indicating a rank or status we can no longer decode. Other fragments depicted bodies, shoulders, and torsos that were proportionally gigantic, matching the immense scale of the severed heads. Unlike the Olmec colossal heads of Mexico, these Guatemalan counterparts appeared to be full-figured statues that had later been broken and scattered by centuries of seismic violence. A road was needed, a path carved through the heart of the ranch to haul felled timber and heavy machinery to the coast. To the men in charge of the construction, the giant stone heads were not priceless archaeological treasures. They were inconvenient obstacles blocking the path of progress. In a grim, methodical crescendo that echoes the destruction of the Buddhas of Bamiyan, the crews brought out the dynamite. You can almost close your eyes and feel the moment, the fuse hissing in the wet heat, the sudden, terrible blast that turned enigmatic faces into shrapnel. With each detonation, a library of cultural memory was pulverized, and the dust settled over the mossy earth like a shroud. What remained was a field of razor-sharp basalt chunks, indistinguishable from common gravel unless you looked very closely for the ghost of a carved eyelid or the curve of a lip. Dr. Padilla Lara and his colleagues scrambled to document what they could before the final act of erasure, but the pace of destruction was merciless. They argued, they pleaded, but the weight of a stone head meant nothing when weighed against the weight of a bulldozer's blade. By the time the international academic community fully grasped the scale of the find, the primary evidence had already been vaporized. Today, the mystery survives only in a handful of faded photographs, a few rolls of film locked away in archival boxes, their emulsions slowly decaying like the memories they hold. These photographs are our last window into a lost chapter, a visual whisper from a world that might have predated the Olmec, or perhaps existed alongside them in an isolation we cannot fathom. The physical dimensions alone defy easy logic. The heads measured between 4 and 6 meters in height, floating on a scale reserved for mythological titans. Transporting such monoliths through dense mountainous jungle without the wheel or beasts of burden would have required a legion of workers driven by an obsession we struggle to comprehend. Where did the basalt originate? The geological surveys suggest the quarries lay many kilometers away, across ravines and rivers that brook no easy passage. This engineering puzzle alone would elevate the builders to the apex of ancient logistical mastery, yet they left no decipherable name, no permanent calling card beyond the shattered stone. The silence of the evidence is its own kind of accusation, pointing toward a level of social organization either far older or far stranger than the standard historical model permits. Now we must step into the labyrinth of speculation, where the rational mind attempts to stitch a quilt from the tatters of a burnt archive. The first and most seductive theory, whispered in the local cantinas and supported by the sheer scale of the art, is that the carvings depict a forgotten race of giants. This is not merely the stuff of biblical fantasy. The material facts press against the boundaries of the possible, forcing us to ask if the statues were truly portraiture rather than myth. Why would a civilization exhaust its resources to sculpt faces that were twice the size of its own kind, unless the subjects themselves did, in fact, stand higher than the torrential rains? Critics argue that ancient art frequently employs hieratic scale, making gods and kings physically larger to signify spiritual or political power. Yet the anatomical detail in the surviving photographs, the realistic proportions of the eyes and the flesh folds on the neck, whisper against pure abstraction. They speak of a live model observed in the raw. A second theory places these heads within the extended Olmec diaspora, a culture of megalithic carvers who scattered their basalt portraits across Mesoamerica. However, the Guatemalan heads break the Olmec mold in unsettling ways. The cranial shape is different. The facial structure leans toward a distinct ethnic signature not seen in the Veracruz or Tabasco finds. Where the Olmec heads appear helmeted and compressed, these monuments possessed a verticality and severity that suggests a separate artistic genome, a lost species of stonework. A third, darker hypothesis has circulated through fringe archaeological circles for years, that the destruction was not purely accidental or driven by road building alone. Some researchers theorize that there was a deliberate, panicked campaign to obliterate the evidence because it contradicted the established narrative of human prehistory in the Americas. Whether this is paranoid fantasy or a scar of institutional insecurity, the fact remains that the explosions came so swiftly that almost no qualified excavation or recording could take place. The timing of the destruction, just as archaeological interest was beginning to crystallize, casts a long and troubling shadow over the official account of a simple timber road. We are left, then, with a puzzle box where the box itself has been burned, and we must reconstruct the shape of the key from the ashes. One can spend a lifetime staring at the photographs, trying to read the expression on those stone lips and walk away feeling only the cold breath of an undecipherable past. If these were the works of a pre-ceramic civilization, then the history of human complexity in the Americas is a book with its first 100 pages torn out. The rusted compass of our understanding spins wildly here. North no longer points to certainty, only to the magnetic pull of our own intellectual limitations. There is a peculiar psychological vertigo that afflicts those who study destroyed evidence, a phantom pain for a limb of history that has been violently amputated. Archaeologists like Dr. Padilla Lara, who held a fractured stone ear in his hands, saw a life's work crumble into a cloud of dynamite smoke and moral defeat. You must understand that these researchers are not simply cataloging artifacts. They are engaged in a desperate race against entropy, against logging companies, and against human greed. Imagine the profound solitude of being the last scholar to possess a photograph of a specific head, knowing that your retinal memory is the only remaining archive of that god's countenance. The human mind, confronted with an empty plinth where a giant's head once rested, begins to invent its own conclusions just to stop the echoing silence. Local guides still speak of similar buried heads deep in the jungle, covered in strangler figs and guarded by fer-de-lance snakes. But these lead often wither into folklore or misremembered natural rock formations. That stratigraphy is now a toxic mixture of diesel fuel, shattered basalt, and the crushing finality of heavy tread marks baked into the mud. So the archaeologist becomes a detective in a crime scene where the body has been cremated, the witnesses have all died, and the perpetrator was the passage of a single fatal afternoon. This mystery does not merely wound our understanding of past cultures, it punctures the arrogance of our modern certainty. If the only evidence for that pulse could be blown up by a logging crew, how many other chapters of human memory have vanished under the asphalt of our advancing highways? There is a comfort in believing history is a solved puzzle until you stand at the edge of this silence and realize the puzzle pieces themselves have been dissolved in a vat of acid. The very landscape of Guatemala remains a reluctant custodian of these secrets, its volcanoes rumbling, its earthquakes cracking open fissures that sometimes swallow the past whole. The relics we seek are not merely missing, they are actively being reclaimed by a hungry biosphere that wraps stone in roots and digests mortar into soil with terrifying efficiency. The deeper philosophy here is not a gentle pastoral reflection, but a harsh reckoning with the fragility of memory on a planetary scale. Time is not a gentle clockmaker. It is a grinding engine of sand and rust, and the colossal heads were simply a brief, defiant anomaly in its relentless march toward oblivion. We cling to the photographs like a drowning man clings to a splinter, hoping that a few pixels of silver nitrate can replace a 4-meter-high monument of volcanic stone. The search continues, driven by a hunger that many call folly, but which others recognize as the most profound form of human love. The love for a past that has been stolen from us. Every turned leaf, every missed trail adds another layer of obsession to a history that feeds on the very hope of its rediscoverers. We now find ourselves in the long, fading twilight of the enigma, where the questions have no answers, only echoes. What did the builders call themselves? What song did they sing as they dragged a patriarch's portrait over the mountain? 88. The stone heads of Guatemala represent more than a lost artifact. They are a mirror reflecting the limits of human sight. They force you to confront the unsettling truth that the past is not a stable, mappable country, but a turbulent ocean that occasionally tosses a strange piece of wreckage onto the shore of the present. The granite certainty of historians means little when faced with a heap of basalt gravel that, until 50 years ago, wore a face. Perhaps the giants in the stone are laughing at us, their immutable lips curled in a faint smile that has now been detonated into a million silent grains. We are a species haunted by our own genesis, forever searching for larger parents, for titans who could explain the gap between what we are and what we once imagined we could be. The destruction of the heads is a particularly cruel act because it weaponizes our own forgetting. It takes a difficult puzzle and throws it into a furnace, telling us to go and find the smoke. The undulating canopy of the Guatemalan coast holds its secrets close, its green waves crashing over the unnamed ruined fields where other titans may still lie dreaming under the loam. Night falls there with a suddenness that swallows the horizon, and in the darkness, the echo of the dynamite seems to reverberate forever, a thunderclap of irreversible loss. We sift through the archival shadows, searching for a trace, a fingerprint on a dry document, a faint sketch on a yellowed map that might bring a dead god back to life. And yet, the abyss stares back with a patience far older than our curiosity, reminding us that some knowledge is sealed not by conspiracy, but by the simple, catastrophic indifference of time. As our journey through this shattered gallery comes to a close, you are left not with a resolution, but with a weight. It is the weight of a stone head that no longer exists, a presence defined entirely by its absence, towering ghost-like in the fog of a history that we can no longer touch, only mourn.